Well, welcome every PAP Zoom meeting. My name is Mike DeCecco. I'm president of the Canadian Antique Phonograph Society. I'm located in the west end of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And again, thank you for coming today. Today we're getting our own private live tour of the Thomas Edison Depot Museum. It's located in the former Grand Trunk Western Railroad Depot in Port Huron, Michigan. And our tour guide is Dave Dazer, and he'll give us a really good tour. We did a practice run through about a week ago, and I was just fascinated with what I saw. I'm sure you'll enjoy it too. What can we say about Dave? He's been a member of CAPS for quite some time, and I remember going to the meetings in Toronto, and Dave was usually he would win the prize for the longest commute member who was there, because he would sometimes come there from his home in Port Huron, Michigan. And it was always nice to chat with Dave. He's extremely knowledgeable about the phonograph topic, and especially anything to do with Thomas Edison. So Dave, I understand you've been the curator at this museum for 6 years, and I'll turn things over to you and have you introduce yourself a bit and tell us about the museum and give us our tour.
All right, thanks, Mike. Welcome everybody to the Thomas Edison Depot Museum. I'm Dave Dazer. I've had a lifelong interest in Thomas Edison. I grew up just a few blocks from where his house was here in Port Huron that he grew up in. And it always impressed me that one of the most famous people in the world grew up in my neighborhood. Kind of made me feel like a bit of a slacker. I haven't invented anything ever or done anything to make myself world famous, but who knows, maybe there's still time after this video is recorded and placed on the CAPS website. There could be Hollywood offers coming in or something. Anyway, I retired from teaching 6 years ago, and the job of running this museum became available. And I got an email from a friend, and she said, "You'd be perfect for that, Dave. You're such an Edison geek." So I put together a resume and I applied for the job, and sure enough, they hired me. And it's been a great pleasure for me to welcome people from all over the world, to talk to them about Thomas Edison and take a tour through this museum. We're located in the original 1858 Grand Trunk Railroad Depot that Thomas Edison began working here as a 12-year-old boy. He rode the train from this station every day to Detroit, and he sold things to passengers on the way there and on the way back. And because he had an all-day layover in Detroit, the railroad let him have a chemical laboratory in the baggage car of the train. And he also printed a newspaper up there, and I'll be happy to show you that later. But when you first come into the museum, you see this video showing here, Young Tom Edison, the 1940 MGM biopic about Edison's boyhood here in Port Huron. There were two videos about Edison. One, Young Tom Edison, which starred Mickey Rooney, and had its world premiere right here in Port Huron on February 10th, the day before Edison's birthday in 1940. Mickey Rooney came, Tom Edison's wife, Mina Edison, was here, Louis B. Mayer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios, Father Flanagan of Boys Town, Edsel Ford, his dad had been Edison's best friend, Harvey Firestone Jr., his dad, and Edison and Ford were camping buddies. So it was a real star-studded affair. And one thing I really like showing people is this movie poster for the movie. This would have hung in the lobby of the movie theater. And here's a full-page ad from the local newspaper on the day that the movie was available for the general public, which was February 11th, Edison's birthday, 1940. And that was donated by a guy came into the museum a few years ago and asked if I wanted it. And I said, sure. And he must have dealt with museums before, because he said, will you use it? And I sure will. I got a spot picked out for it right now. So he left it with me and we display it here. Now the movie, as I said, had its world premiere here in 1940. All of it was filmed in Hollywood on a sound stage. But when Port Huron residents heard about this movie being filmed, they lobbied really hard with MGM Studios to have the world premiere held here. And in late January, they finally got word from MGM that yes, February 10th, 1940, we'll be there with the world premiere of the movie. It's a very entertaining movie if you've ever seen it. Every time we show it here at the museum, I give a little talk afterwards and tell people just how bad it really is in terms of historical accuracy. For example, I don't know if you can see it on the screen or not. That's Tom with his sister Tanny. In real life, he was the youngest member of the Edison family. 10. He was older, married, and actually died in 1863, the year he left Port Huron. That's just one of the many things they got wrong. Little things like everybody calls him Tom in the movie, where when he lived in Port Huron, he went by his middle name, Al. So I could go on and on about this movie, but I won't. Come and watch it with us sometime, and then you can hear my presentation. So we're going to walk in here now, and we'll talk about his parents and his Canadian roots. So these are his parents, Sam Edison. He was from Digby, Nova Scotia. This is his mother, Nancy. She was from New York. And the family was living in Vienna, Ontario. And his father took part in the Mackenzie Rebellion against the British Crown. And of course it failed. And as a trader, he had to leave Canada. He came through Port Huron, where he had relatives. He ended up in Milan, Ohio, where he built this house on the Milan Canal. And that's where their seventh and last child, Thomas Alva Edison, was born. His middle name comes from a family friend, Captain Alva Bradley. They must have really been close friends. They honored their final son with the captain's name as his middle name. Yeah, the house that he was born in, as I said, was built by his father. It's still there. It's a great little tour. If you're ever down that way, be sure to stop in. And Milan, Ohio is a picture postcard, cute little town with, you know, the downtown area is like a square. The 19th century buildings are there. There's a little gazebo. And many of you have heard of Don Gaffel, the wood horn guy. He has a wonderful shop there in Milan, Ohio, where he sells all kinds of phonographs and related things. On a side note, Don's house across the street from the shop is a replica of Edison's Menlo Park laboratory. So when I heard that, I told Don, okay, you win the Edison competition. You know, you're his biggest fan. I'll settle for number 2 position here. So anyway, let's come this way. I'll show you this display. You might notice he's got a birthday hat on. We had a special tour here on Friday, which was Edison's 175th birthday. So we're still decorated for that. But everybody who grew up in Port Huron has heard this story that Tom went to school one day and he overheard the teacher say, "Oh, that Edison kid, he's so addled." And addled is an old-fashioned word, mixed up, stupid, goofy, whatever you want to say. It was not a compliment in any case. So he went home and he told his mother about it, and she came and yelled at his teacher. And she said, "Mr. Crawford, he is not dumb. In fact, he's a lot smarter than you are. And if you can't teach him, I will." So she homeschooled him. She had been a teacher in Vienna, Ontario, and they had a nice library at home. His father was a well-read man. So she tutored him at home. But at age 12, his formal education stopped. And that's when he got this job riding the train from this station every day to Detroit. He was very successful at it. He sold newspapers and magazines, cigars, dime novels, fruits, vegetables, whatever he thought he could make money at. And he also bought fruits and vegetables and periodicals wholesale in Detroit, brought them back up on the train, and he had 2 stands here in Port Huron, a vegetable and fruit stand and a periodical stand, and he hired other boys to run those. He ended up closing those down. He didn't trust the boys that were running the stands for him here in Port Huron. But he was very successful. He gave his mother and father $1 a day out of his earnings, and he kept about $5 a day for himself, which he foolishly spent on books and chemical supplies and laboratory equipment to set up his first laboratory in the basement of his Port Huron home. And we'll see that in just a second. Over here, we have the station's telegraph office. Now, Edison was fascinated with telegraphy. It was probably one of the highest forms of technology, certainly electrical technology in its day. And he was trying very hard to learn how to be a telegraph operator. He even went so far as to run a telegraph line with homemade equipment between his house and his neighbor boys, and they would practice sending Morse code messages back and forth. Sort of a testimony to maybe his abilities as a telegraph operator, or his equipment. Sometimes his friend would have to lift up the old double hung window and holler out, "Hey, Al, what are you trying to say?" So maybe he wasn't that good as a sender or receiver. But that changed when one day in Mount Clemens on the way to Detroit, that's about halfway to Detroit from here, he saved the station master's son from being killed by a runaway train car. And in gratitude, Mr. McKenzie there offered to tutor Tom in Morse code as a way to reward him. So Tom took him up on that, and for about 3 months, he would spend every day in Mount Clemens practicing Morse code. I think he knew the code, had it memorized, you know, an A is a dot and a dash, a B is a dot and 3 dashes, or the other way around, I don't know. Can't recall exactly. But I think it's pretty easy to memorize the code. It's another to actually put it into practice, getting the spacing just right, and, you know, knowing all of that, and maintaining the spacing properly. Otherwise, it just turns out gibberish to the person that you're trying to send the message to. But every train station back then had a telegraph office. That's the way they dispatched trains. It was a huge safety improvement too, being able to dispatch trains through telegraph. And one of the things we have here at the museum that school kids especially like is our telegraph. I don't know if you can hear it on the video or not, but we've got a closed circuit here. There's a key here and a sounder over there, and a key and a sounder here, and people can practice sending messages to each other. It's a lot of fun to try that out for kids. This shows Edison as a boy interested with electricity, static electricity generated by petting the cat. What I found really interesting was I read a biography of Nikola Tesla. He did the same thing in Serbia, and neither cat seemed to appreciate the interest in science that the respective inventors showed. Here's Tom at 10 years old, or Al, as I should say. He was known by Al in Port Huron. We have pictures of him as a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old. I've seen 16 when he was over in Stratford. I'm not sure if it was common to take that many pictures of kids in those days. I don't believe it was because of the expense. My theory is because the Edisons had lost 3 children before he was born. They died before they even reached the age of 6, and he was sickly. Maybe they thought, well, we better get some pictures of this kid in case something happens, because he was ill a lot as a child. In fact, he had scarlet fever, which ended up contributing to his hearing issues later in life. So in spite of the stories you may have heard about the engineer picking him up by the train, or conductor picking him up by his ears to help him up on the train, or when he caught the train on fire at Smith's Creek, just outside Port Huron, the conductor boxed his ears. Pretty sure, I'm going to believe what his mother said, that he started to lose his hearing after he had scarlet fever. Now, the bugle represents sort of the playful side that Edison had his whole life. He loved jokes, practical jokes, and pranks, and things like that. Here, the way the museum tells the story is that he and his friend would go to Fort Gratiot, which was all along here. His home was actually on Fort Gratiot Military Reservation property. The family owned the house, but not the 10 acres it was on. So it was just a few steps away from his house where the fort was. So according to the way the story is told here, the boys took a bugle and they would blow the wrong bugle call at the wrong time. It got the soldiers all worked up. They did that for 3 nights in a row. And on the 3rd night, they were waiting for them. They chased them. The soldiers caught his friend who spent the night at the brig at the fort. Tom ran home and ran into the cellar of his house and hid. The soldiers ran down there. They woke his father up and they searched and searched. They couldn't find him. They said to his father, there must be another way out of here. We saw him come in here. His father assured them there was only one way in and one way out, but nobody could find them. What he did, there were 3 barrels down there, and he tipped the potatoes out of one barrel into another, turned it upside down and hid underneath it. And he could hear how angry the soldiers were. So he was pretty scared. And in spite of the fact he said that the barrel had rotten potatoes in it, he stayed in there. And I can't imagine how putrid that must have smelled. Mm-hmm. If you've ever had a rotten potato, in the back of your pantry or whatever, it's an awful smell. Now, Edison never wrote an autobiography, but he did dictate autobiographical notes. And in one of the notes that he dictated, he told the story a little differently. There was no bugle. It was just he and his friend went to the end sentry of the fort, and they tried to mimic a man's voice, and they would holler up, "Corporal of the Guard," and then they would listen as that message was passed all the way down, and the guy would show up and, what do you want? There was nobody there. So that's the way Edison himself told the story. I don't know why when they set up the museum they had a bugle, but I'm going to believe what Edison said about it. Well, here's a model of the Edison home. It was probably the nicest home in the area. And as I said, it was on Fort Gratiot Military Reservation property. It was built by the original sutler of the fort. Sutler is the person who would provide provisions and things like that for the fort. It was a civilian job. The Edisons moved to Port Huron in 1854, and they purchased this house for $2,500. That was 1854. 1863, 9 o'clock at night, according to the court records, there was a knock on the door. Samuel Edison, Tom's dad, opened the door, and there were two generals standing there in full uniform, the Hartsuff brothers. They presented Mr. Edison with a what do you call it when you kick somebody out of their house? A letter of eviction. Thank you, Sarah. And they said, "You got to leave." And he says, "You're not kicking me out of my own house." And they said, "Oh, yes, we are. And if you don't go quietly, we've got soldiers at the fort who would back this order up." So again, Edison said, "I'm not leaving." And they said, "Look, if you go quietly, we'll give you $300. Well, Sam Edison was not the kind of guy you messed around with. He said, $300 does not even cover the doors and windows of this house. Get out of here. They said, "Okay, slow down. Look, if you go quietly, we'll give you $250 now and $250 in 90 days. But you are leaving, like it or not." So he and his wife talked it over, and they said, "Yeah, these guys mean business. We better take the 500 or we're going to end up with nothing." So they took the 500. They immediately started a letter writing campaign to get their house back. It went all the way to the Secretary of War, who assigned a general to look into it, which just happened to be one of the men involved with stealing this house from the Edisons. And he made his case very simple to the Secretary of War. He said, "Look, you've got to decide who gets this house. These rabble-rousing Canadian refugees who have never served this country, or the Hartsuff family, now in third generation of service to this great land." Well, it was a pretty easy decision for that guy to make, and the Edisons gave up all hope of ever regaining their property. So a few years later, Tom was back home visiting, and they found a lighted bale of hay against that house. Somebody tried to set it on fire. They saved it at that time, but the man never left it unattended. He kept one eye open all night. I think he was worried about Sam Edison. Finally, in 1870, for the first time ever, the father of these two generals had to leave the house because his wife passed away and the funeral was being held in New York. That's when the home was destroyed by fire. I'm pretty sure Sam Edison had a hand in it. When they did archaeology there in the late 1970s, early 1980s, over the course of several summers, a state fire inspector looked over the site and he said, "There's definitely evidence of arson here." So you just got to follow the money, or who would have the most reason to want to burn that house down? Obviously Sam Edison, because it was stolen from him. And I like to believe that maybe he got some advice from his son on how to make a 19th century time bomb. Tom caught the train car on fire just outside Port Huron when he was working on it. He had phosphorus on board. They used to sell phosphorus in bottles filled with kerosene to keep the air off of it. And that fell on the floor. So immediately the phosphorus, when the air hit it, it started on fire. That caught the kerosene on fire. So my own personal theory is maybe Tom told his dad, "Take a bucket of kerosene with some phosphorus in there, put that in the house. When the kerosene evaporates enough, it's going to catch on fire. The kerosene will catch on fire. You got a nice little time bomb, 1870. Burn up the evidence too. Just a theory, but it's kind of fun to think about who may have done it. As I said, they did archaeology there for several summers. In fact, the archaeologists and the college students stayed right here in this depot. Obviously, it wasn't a museum then, It was a pretty rough shape, but at least they were kept out of the elements. But here's Tom's first laboratory. Again, he's still decorated for his birthday. He had a laboratory in the cellar of his house. Based on the archaeology, we think it was in the southwest corner of the house based on the things they found there. He had bottles filled with chemicals that he would buy in Detroit on his daily excursions. His mother allowed him to do this on one condition, that he find a way to keep the other kids out of his laboratory because there were, the chemicals were dangerous. His solution was to label every bottle poison. But then he also put a number on each bottle, and he had a hidden log book, so he knew what was in every bottle. Now, we tend to think of Edison as the electrical guy. He saw himself as a chemist. That was his true love. In fact, many times he sought the answer in chemistry before other things, especially, for example, developing the electric meter. It was a chemistry thing, basically. Won't go into all that, but here's some of the artifacts they found. We've got bottles that may have held, can you show this? Sure. We've got bottles that may have held chemicals at one time. Plates, there's an ink bottle there, part of an oil lamp. The most exciting thing though is this printer's type. He printed a newspaper on the train for about 6 months. And there's printer's type that he used to, can you get it right in there or no? It's hard to see. We even have a magnifying glass to show it. Very tedious job to print the newspaper letter by letter, upside down and backwards. I think that's why he only did it for about 6 months. We have a boot here, a child's boot. That may have been his as a kid. As far as I know, no children lived in the home after he did. And, who knows, maybe these things here, women's compact and a brooch and stuff, that may have belonged to his mother and sister. I'd like to point out Nancy Edison here, bringing Tom a snack down in the laboratory. You can see that it's apple pie and milk. That was his favorite snack. His friend said he ate it by the yard. If you look at any old pictures from the Menlo Park laboratory, late night snack was always apple pie. His daughter wrote that, they lived across the street from the Menlo Park lab, and she would bring him lunch every day. And she would always look in the little picnic basket that she carried it with and open up the napkin, and there was always a huge slice of apple pie on top. So Tom's favorite snack. Here we show him setting up the telegraph. I told you the story of that he set that up between his house and his neighbor boys. Here's a copy of the Detroit Free Press. He sold the Free Press on the train. You don't have to show that. Okay. It's too small. But he got to Detroit one day, and this was during the American Civil War, and there was a bulletin board talking about the Battle of Shiloh. They called it Pittsburgh Landing back then, but any Civil War buffs today would call it Shiloh. 50,000 casualties. Well, Tom, our newsboy here, knew that he could sell a lot of copies of that newspaper. So he went to the telegraph operator in Detroit, and he said to the guy, "Hey, do me a favor. Telegraph all the stations between here and Port Huron and tell them about this battle. Tell them that they should put a notice up like you did, but also include the fact that the newsboy on the train will have copies of the paper for sale. Now, if you do that for me, I'll give you 3 months newspaper free and 3 months Harper's Weekly magazine free." So the guy said, "Sure, Al, I'll do that for you." So then young Al Edison went to the Detroit Free Press, walked into the circulation department, and said, "I'd like 1,000 copies of this paper to sell on the train today, but I can only pay you right now for 300. Can I get the rest on credit?" And they said, "Get out of here, kid." So he wasn't deterred. He went to the publisher's office. He told the publisher what he had done with the telegraph operator, and the man was so impressed with his entrepreneurship, he said, "Give the kid the papers." So Al paid another boy to help him get 1,000 copies of the paper to the train, got it all loaded up. At the first station they pulled into, he was used to selling 2 papers. He sold 35 copies. Now he's thinking, "Oh, I wish I had more." So he knew enough about basic economics to realize the law of supply and demand would dictate just have to raise the price. So that's what he did. At each station stop between Detroit and Port Huron that day, the price went up and up and up until he got back to Port Huron. He was standing on the end of the train car. He's hollering out, "Gentlemen, they're 25 cents a piece. I don't have enough to go around." He sold every copy that day and made a fortune. That's when he got the bright idea to start making his own newspaper. So he bought a little printing press, some type, and here's a copy of the paper. As far as I know, you won't be able to read it. It's a bad copy. As far as I know, there's only one copy known to exist, and that's in New Jersey at the National Edison Historic Site. And Blaine McCutcheon and I were there one time, and Blaine was with me, and I had made an appointment with the archivist to see this newspaper. And I remember saying, "Now, Lenny, before you show this to me, I read in a book published the year Edison died that he had a copy of this paper at his home in a special two-sided frame, so you could see both sides of it." And he said, "Well, I don't know if this is the one or not that he had at his house, but it is in a two-sided frame." So he pulled it out of his case and he handed it over to us. And I was so thrilled to be able to see that newspaper. What was also of great interest to me was the original tintype of this picture. It's only about this big, a really small thing. But you know, I've seen this my whole life growing up here in Port Huron. That's Al Edison, Port Huron, the newsboy. So that was pretty exciting for us, and I was really glad Blaine could share that experience with me. This is one of the trains that took Edison to Detroit every day. He loved riding in the cab with the guys. He would give them fruit and things, but I think they just kind of liked him. He looks like a likable kid when you look at his picture. And, you know, who doesn't appreciate a hard worker, you know? And so I think they enjoyed having him up there in the cab. And that was his goal in life. He wanted to be an engineer. Well, one day this crew had been at a dance the night before, or trainman's ball, or whatever you want to call it. I think they were very hungover. So Tom said, "Why don't you guys take a nap? I'll run the train." And they foolishly said, "Sure, please do." So he's driving the train to Detroit, and he pulled into a station where he remembered they always filled up the boiler with water. He did that, and then they always oil this thing in here. So he lifted up this lid, steam came rushing out, and he slammed it shut, and we'll make it to the next station on time, no problem. Well, a few miles down the track, black sooty water started shooting out of that smokestack and totally trashed this engine. And it was a real point of pride with engineers there to keep these engines clean and all the brass polished. I mean, they were works of art, they were beautiful, and that was their pride and joy. When they pulled into the next station, they were the laughing stock of the railroad. Every engineer took one look and knew exactly what had happened. Somebody had overfilled the boiler. So when the water started heating and expanding, it had nowhere else to go except out the smokestack. And this is a wood burner. You can imagine how filthy that was. Now, I always wondered if they made him clean that up. You know, as a teacher and father, I thought, yeah, that makes the most sense, right? You made the mess. That's the natural consequence. You clean it up. And that's what I kind of personally believed until a couple of years ago. I had an old guy in here from Alabama who had been a train engineer. And he said, "Oh, no. There ain't no way they would have made him clean that up, because then they would have had to admit they was all sleeping. They'd have got fired." So that made as much sense as anything, I guess. You know, you don't want everybody to know about your mistakes, I suppose, when it comes to that. This is a fun thing. If you come to visit, you can search your genealogy and see if you have an Edison connection. I like to tease people when they're doing that, saying that, you know, when he died, he had no heirs. Maybe you're the heir to the Edison fortune. Of course, that's not true. He did leave a small fortune, $12 million in 1931, but most of it went to his two youngest sons, Theodore and Charles. So there are no long lost heirs. These are some little videos you can watch. Does it show up very well on the camera?
Not very. No.
Not very. No point in playing one. They're local people. They're all gossiping about Edison. There's a really fun one. These Port Huron ladies. She starts off, "Well, I don't want to gossip." Well, guess what she does 2 seconds later? She's very nasty about it. It's kind of fun to watch. But you've got to come and visit me here. We're open April, weekends till June, and then 7 days a week until Labor Day. Stop in, tell me you're a CAPS member, and I'll be especially nice. Here's a map. I call it the Where Edison Slept map. He worked as a telegraph operator. After learning how to operate the telegraph in Mount Clemens, his first job was here in Port Huron, downtown Port Huron, at Walker's Jewelry Store. Mr. Walker had a little corner of it as a Western Union office, as a little revenue stream. He didn't last very long there. They had a dispute about wages. Tom's dad thought Tom should be earning $25 a month as a telegraph operator. Mr. Walker would only pay $20. So they parted ways. And his next job was in Stratford, Ontario. He didn't last long in Stratford. He decided he needed to work nights so he could do his experiments during the day. And then at night, there's much less going on at the railroad station. He could catch a nap if he needed to. Well, one day his boss told him there's a train coming through at 10:30. You need to hold that train because another train is coming in the opposite direction on the same track. Well, he fell asleep, and as the train came through the station, the rumbling woke him up. He realized his mistake. He ran out, tried to find the switchman to route the train off onto a side track. He fell in the ditch. Finally, when he caught up to the guy, it was too late. But fortunately for him, the trains were moving very slowly towards each other because it was right downtown Stratford. And Blaine McCutcheon took me there one time and showed me where the two stations were. And the story all made much more sense when I could see, how close the stations were to each other and all of that. Well, they saw each other, so they didn't collide. But the next day, Edison and his boss were summoned to Toronto to meet with the superintendent of the railroad, who first started on Edison's boss. Why are you letting this young boy have such responsibility? And then he started on Edison. Young man, I'll see you in Kingston prison for dereliction of duty, reckless endangerment of life and property, whatever else he could think of for charges. Right then, two very important visitors from England showed up. And the superintendent said, you two wait in the hall. We'll finish this in a few minutes. As soon as the door closed, Edison ran down to the freight yard, hopped a train over to Sarnia or Point Edward. And that was the end of his career with the railroad in Canada. And Blaine was telling me that years later, Tom's dad was trying to get Tom's wages for that time period from the railroad. And by now, Thomas Edison is a household name and very wealthy. And he wrote his dad and said, look, this is embarrassing. Please don't do this. And his dad said, it's not about the money. It's the principle of the thing. So eventually, the railroad made a big deal of presenting Sam Edison Tom's wages for that time period. So Blaine knows a lot about Edison's time in Stratford. I think he wrote about it in one of the bulletins, but apparently some old lady there claimed that he stayed at the house that she lived in, and turns out that house hadn't even been built yet when Edison was there. Blaine's theory is that Edison was probably hot bunking with the day operator. So as that guy would go on shift, Edison would go to sleep in the quarters there at the train station. Now, if you look, he didn't stay anywhere very long. In 3 different years, he was in 3 different cities. And these are really cool. You pull it out, you can find out what he did there. This one says, Tom and 2 friends planned to go to work in Brazil, but riots in New Orleans delayed them. So Tom returned briefly to Port Huron. He borrowed $10 and headed for Louisville's Western Union office. He guessed wrong while filling in gaps in a news story. He accidentally spilled acid, which dripped onto his boss's office below. Again, Edison was fired. I don't know what you picture when you think of a bottle of acid. It wasn't just a little bottle. It was a 5-gallon carboy. So imagine that tipping over and dripping. You're going to lose a couple of gallons, I think, before the level of the acid gets below the neck. So there was a lot of acid dripped through the floor onto that boss's desk. And almost every one of these talks about some mishap he had somewhere. He was much better being the boss and running the laboratory than he was at working for other people. So this is kind of a fun thing. Come on this way. Here we go. 175th birthday party was here on Friday night. This is a little display. It was supposed to be temporary 5 years ago for Edison's 170th birthday. And it's all about when Hollywood came to Port Huron. If you come this way, I'll show you some of the more interesting things. So this is Mina Edison's letter that she's going to come for this. I don't know if you can close up on that or not, but it says Glenmont, that's the name of his house, Llewellyn Park, Orange, New Jersey. Mrs. Mina M. Edison Hughes is pleased to accept the kind invitation of the Mayor, City Commission, and citizens of Port Huron to be present at the world premiere of Young Tom Edison on Saturday, February 10th. So she let them know on February 8th that she would be here. Here's a telegram from his son, Charles. Charles ended up being governor of New Jersey and secretary of the Navy during World War II. Here's a telegram from his youngest son, Theodore, saying he can't make it. The director, he had a cold, he couldn't make it. The Premier of Ontario, Mitchell Hepburn, was invited. Former President Herbert Hoover was invited. This is one of my favorites too. This is from the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote her a little note that she was unable to attend. Can you get on that Desmond Theater picture? I don't know if it shows up or not. It's hard to tell.
That's good. That's good.
So it was all decorated and lit up pretty big for this event. This is probably the biggest thing that ever happened in our town. Was Mickey Rooney came. Personally, I wouldn't walk across the street to see him, but that's just me. Here's the train they rode up on from Greenfield Village. Henry Ford loaned them that train. And all the towns in between wanted that train to stop. At one point, people actually blocked the tracks to get the train to stop. And here's Mickey Rooney coming into the Harrington Hotel, which was right next to the Desmond Theater where the movie was being shown. So all the big shots stayed there. So I give these Edison heritage tours in Port Huron where we ride on a trolley and I take the people all through Port Huron. Many of the places where Edison worked and did this and that are still here, which is kind of fun. Our last stop on that is the cemetery where his mother, father, brother, sister, nieces, nephews, they're all buried up there. And so lots of Edison's still here in Port Huron, no living relatives, but anyway, here on the train, we've got Thomas Edison's widow. That's her stepson. She remarried after Tom died. And then her second husband passed away just a couple of weeks before she came to this event. And here's Mickey Rooney reenacting his role as the news butcher, offering the stuff to Mina Edison. They had a luncheon called the We Know Edison luncheon. And here's Louis B. Mayer. Here's Father Flanagan. This is Louis Wilde from the Times Herald, the local newspaper. And it was a We Knew Edison luncheon, and people spoke there, you know, if they had known him back in the day. One of the people who spoke was his half-sister, who was living in Sarnia, Ontario at the time. And she said, what I have to tell you today, anything I know about Thomas Edison, I heard from our father. The only time I ever met the man was at our father's funeral. When Tom's mom, Nancy, passed away in 1870, his father was 66 years old. And 2 weeks later, he took up with their 16-year-old housekeeper. And they spent the next 20 years together and had 3 daughters, Mabel, Maud, and Mariette. And one of them is buried in Brights Grove across the river here. The other 2 are in Lakeside Cemetery in Port Huron. Be careful of any of the words there. Well, we're going to go upstairs now to see the train car that Tom rode on. This is not the actual car, but it's one just like it. It's a few years newer. It's, I think this was built about 1880, but they didn't change much. And here we have the recreation of Edison's laboratory. This is a combination car, it's called. combination meaning it had freight and passengers. So this would have been the freight part of it. The railroad foolishly let him have a chemical lab here, and they were rewarded with the fire, of course. He printed the newspaper up here too. I don't know, this probably won't show up, but this is one of my favorite things in the museum. It's a letter. When Henry Ford was building Greenfield Village, he wrote a letter to William Meadowcroft, Edison's personal secretary, and asked him to find out from Edison what sort of printing equipment he had on the train as a boy. So Meadowcroft wrote this note to Edison, who in typical Edison fashion responded right on the note. And he wrote, "Oh, this is all wrong. I had what was called the galley-proof press. Every paper had one. They probably still do." And then he drew this picture. I don't know if you can show that, if it'll show up, honey. Can you see it?
Yep, that's good. That's good.
Well, when they were remodeling this train station into the museum, they got word that this letter was being offered at auction somewhere. So they made sure they got it. I'd love to know what they paid for it. I'm sure it was pretty expensive because of the content and the drawing and all of that. But anyway, I'm glad we have it. And it's amazing how most visitors don't look at it unless I point it out, and then they think it's pretty cool. So back here's the rest of the train. Still decorated for the birthday party. We use it now as a classroom situation for school groups, and lots of Girl Scouts come here. We have merit badges they earn, this experiments about electricity and things they do. So that's kind of cool. So let's keep going. We'll go downstairs. It's hard for you to see everything in a Zoom meeting. This is our version of the Black Maria, the very first motion picture studio in the world. As many of you know, Edison was very instrumental in developing motion pictures. Here's a picture of the original Black Maria. It was interesting in that the roof would open up, and it was on a track. You could follow the sun in order to keep enough sunlight in to film these movies. In the 20s, they tore it down. Edison got out of the motion picture business, I believe, before 1910. So they tore this down. They weren't using it anymore. In the 50s, his sons Charles and Theodore, who I really admire for their respect for what their father had accomplished, realized that that was a horrible mistake. So they had it rebuilt. And if you ever go to Orange, New Jersey, to the Edison National Historic Site, you can see the replica of it that his sons had built. It's pretty cool to see. It's a wonderful place to visit if you're into Edison at all. You can tour his home. You can tour the laboratory complex. His personal office is there. It's an amazing place. I'll be going again in April. Looking forward to that. So we're going to walk through the Black Maria, where we have a great little video with an Edison reenactor that was filmed down at Edison's Greenfield Village laboratory, the Menlo Park lab. If you've never been there, it's worth the trip. Plan on 2 days. There's the Henry Ford Museum. That's a full day to visit everything. And then there's Greenfield Village, which is a collection of historic buildings that Henry Ford purchased and had moved there. And the crown jewel of that is Edison's Menlo Park Laboratory. Also, the Sarah Jordan boarding house, where his unmarried workers live. The glass blowing house from Menlo Park, I believe, is there. They have his grandfather's house from Vienna, Ontario, was purchased and moved there. The machine shop from Menlo Park. It's an amazing place. I love going there. So come on this way. We're just about done, folks, in case you're getting antsy. Of course, Edison's favorite invention, and ours too probably, is the phonograph. And we have a 1903 Edison standard phonograph. And people are always amazed when I ask, would you like to hear this? It's 118 years old. And, and it still works? And yes, it does. And it sounds just as great as it did in 1903. I won't play it for you. You've all heard them before. We also have a diamond disc machine, 1920. Of course, one of my jobs is keeping everything in good shape here. So in fact, I think I might take the Edison Standard home this winter before April and give it a good cleaning and overhaul. Make sure everything stays in good shape. That's the key to keeping your phonographs in good condition. Keep them clean and keep them oiled. So motion picture, this is a hands-on display that we have. Crank this and you can watch this movie here. This is first copyrighted motion picture, I think, called The Sneeze with Fred Ott, a longtime Edison employee. He and his brother John both worked for Edison. In fact, Edison thought so much of these two when he died in 1931. He was one of 3 people that Edison left $10,000 to. His personal secretary, William Meadowcroft, and Fred Ott and John Ott both received $10,000. Unfortunately for John Ott, he died the day after Edison. And out of respect for his long years of service, Mina Edison had John's crutches placed against Edison's casket at the funeral when he laid in state at the Menlo Park, or not Menlo Park lab, at the Orange, New Jersey lab. Here's one of the biggest light bulbs ever made. This is a 50,000 watt bulb. This was on top of a proposed permanent memorial to Thomas Edison that was put up in downtown Port Huron, across the street from the Desmond Theater, where they had the world premiere of the movie. And in 1940, Tom Edison's wife lit this light bulb up. And we have a newsreel here that you can watch. I won't show that to you today. Can't see everything on a Zoom meeting, I guess. But, it's amazing how bright this is. When you watch it on the video, I just feel myself kind of squinting because I feel like my eyes are going to get burned out watching it even on the video. I can't imagine what it was like in real life. Here's our display about phonographs. Here's a replica of the first phonograph built by John Crucy. Many of you probably know this story, but Edison was working on a device to record telegraph transmissions, and it was on a strip of paper, wax paper, was taken up on a spool, and he pulled it through. And as it passed over the embossing needle, it reminded him of garbled human speech. So he had this idea that maybe he could record sound. So he made a very rough sketch, gave it to John Crucy, and said, "Make this." 3 days later, Crucy came back with this. The story is, he said, "What is it? What does it do?" I really find that hard to believe, that he would ask a man to build something this, it's quite simple in operation or whatever, but without telling him what it was supposed to do, because he had, I think, would have to fill in a lot of details on his own. It makes no sense that you would just have him build it from a sketch. But anyway, he brought it back. He told everybody it was supposed to do. The crew was very skeptical that it would work. And they watched as he carefully wrapped the mandrel with tin foil and smoothed it all out, cranked it and spoke into it. Everybody knows what he said. "Mary had a little lamb." In fact, one of our displays here, you listen to him saying that. He said he was never so taken aback by anything as he was by this, because it worked the first time. So 5 years ago, for Edison's 170th birthday, I took that home, made some parts that were missing, and got it working. And my family got pretty tired of me shouting "Mary had a little lamb" over and over and over as I would test it each time. Making the stylus for that was very tedious, but it ended up working, and we demonstrated it on Edison's 170th birthday. It hasn't really been used since then. So this is Edison in 1927, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the phonograph. I don't know if you know this, but Edison gave away the original phonograph, and it was at a museum in London for many years. And he asked for it back. And they said, "Well, you gave it to us." And he said, "Well, I think I kind of just loaned it." And they, "Oh, no, you gave it away." Finally, I believe the president had to get involved, and they got the original phonograph back in time to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the phonograph. And this was recorded at the time. Oh. Here's the display we have about the electric pen. I don't know why they chose this particular invention when they built the museum, but they did. We don't have one here, unfortunately. I wish we did. They have one at Milan, Ohio at the Edison Birthplace Museum. They're pretty rare, pretty expensive. So I doubt we'll ever have one here. This is a kind of a fun display. You crank this handle and you generate lights for these little districts, District A, B, and C. This has been a very difficult display to get to work properly. And last summer, I had an electrical engineer as a visitor in, and I showed it to him, and he came back the next day, and we spent about 4 hours going through this. You know, I was cranking, he was making voltage readings, and he said, well, the bad news is I think it's working as it was designed. So the good news is I think I can improve it. So about a month later, I got a little package in the mail, a small box with 4 wires on it, a diagram of where to put all the wires, and now even little kids are able to get this thing to light up. So this talks about, you know, the electric light. I'm very careful not to say Edison invented the light bulb. Many people were, it was a well-known concept, let's just say that. But what I don't think people remember is that what good is a bushel basket full of light bulbs without the infrastructure behind it to make it work? And that is Edison, the generating plants, the sockets, that threaded base that we all know on light bulbs, that's called an Edison base. That was a patented feature, nobody else could do that. Other people invented light bulbs or developed light bulbs that had different types of bases, the Thomson-Houston base, and all kinds of other things, but it's the Edison base that stuck around. So that's kind of cool. We're gonna wrap this up in just a minute. Here's our museum store. I want to show you our latest thing. We have a lot of artifacts from the archaeology that was done there. And we started putting together these shadow boxes. And in this one, there's a nail from Edison's boyhood home. Attractively displayed here. And that's $45. We have a bigger one. I just sold it on Friday at the birthday party. It includes a nail and some small shards of pottery that were found in the home. So it's kind of a cool, cool thing to have, I think. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. And if anybody has some questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. If you're still awake.
Well, I'm just going to jump in quickly and say that was absolutely outstanding, Dave. And
Definitely.
Sarah, the job with the camera, just
Me
fantastic.
too.
Yeah. Well done. That was just excellent. Thank you.
I guess I'll keep her around then.
Yeah, yeah, she's a keeper.
Great
Actually,
presentation. Great
I had a
presentation.
question. Does someone else have a question? Do you want to speak?
Yeah, great presentation. I appreciate that a lot. It was obvious that Edison was very entrepreneurial, yeah, even as a young man.
Yes, he learned that from his father. His father was the same way. He did a lot of different things. And I think the one lesson Edison learned as a boy from his father was it's okay to fail, just never give up. And that was the secret to his success. He never gave up, just kept going, going, going.
Cool.
Does anybody else have any questions? How about some questions about Edison himself?
Well, I think what's interesting about his boyhood entrepreneurship is one thing, but he didn't turn out to be a very good businessman, did he? He got screwed a bit by Western Union and some of the other big companies in the telegraph business, didn't he, Dave? And I've always had the sense that he was, a brilliant inventor and developer, and somebody who wanted to make things of practical value for the benefit of mankind, as opposed to purely inventing something, as you pointed out. What good's a light bulb if you don't know how to apply it or to create
Right.
the infrastructure for it. But he never struck me as a very good businessman as such. Would you agree?
I think, like many entrepreneurs, he had his share of failures, but I think even today, if you die with $12 million, that's a sign of success by
Well,
most
yeah.
people's
Yeah.
measurement. But sure, he had failures in life, but he kept going.
Yeah.
Probably his biggest failure was he was trying to get low grade ore by crushing the rock and then using electromagnets to extract it. And that was being done in Ogden, New Jersey. And that was a project he was totally into. He loved just spending time out there in the shack that he had built at the mine. He developed all this rock crushing equipment. And after several years, he decided this is a failure. It's time to cut our losses. And he said to the guys, well, we wasted millions of dollars, but damn, we had a good time, didn't we? But in typical Edison fashion, he learned, and he used that rock crushing equipment to go into the cement making business. And he developed the rotary kiln, which is used by every cement manufacturer now. In fact, it was Edison Cement that built Yankee Stadium in New York, which used to be, everyone called it the house that Ruth built, referring to Babe Ruth. But it was the house that Thomas Edison built. It was Edison Portland Cement that built that. He also envisioned precast homes made entirely out of cement, and a few were built. In fact, I saw one not too far from Orange, New Jersey. If Blaine goes with me this next trip, I'm going to take him out to show him that Edison Portland Cement house. They're beautiful, well constructed, and made to last. But not very many were built, unfortunately. So yeah, was he a bad businessman? Yeah, somebody said he should have invented a machine to kick himself in the butt for all of his mistakes, but he just kept going and going and going, and to his credit, did accomplish a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I think the fact we're still talking about him 175 years after his birth shows he must have been pretty successful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And we still enjoy having lights in our house that don't involve a flame. I enjoy listening to recorded music, going to the movies. Improved storage batteries are being used to power electric cars. He was into that 100 years ago.
Yeah.
His impact, it's lingering.
I've got a question about diamond discs. Why didn't it succeed the way that regular lateral recordings did? Because in my opinion, the sound of the diamond discs sometimes is superior to the early Victor recordings.
I agree with you, but I think probably its lack of success compared to the others had a lot to do with the choice of music. I'm like Mike, I like the machines, but I hardly ever play them because I think most of the music on Edison diamond discs and cylinders is just painful to listen to in a lot of cases. It wasn't until he finally decided he would let other people choose what went on the record that you finally started getting those fun dance tunes out of the 20s. Otherwise, he was an old man with an old man's taste in music, and people wanted to buy the snappier dance tunes that were not available on the Edison record. But technically, yeah, I believe they did sound better. So that's my opinion. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but I think a lot of it had to do with the choice of music that was available on it.
That sounds like a good explanation. Thank you.
But
You're welcome.
There's also the fact that the records he made were Hill and Dale, so you needed to use the Edison machine to play them on. So he limited his market immediately by making the records have to go with his machine.
But that was part of the mystique of Edison and having the highest quality. You didn't have steel needles to change. You didn't play your records with dull needles, which would have affected the quality.
Mm-hmm.
As long as your diamond stylus wasn't damaged, you had a high quality sound without the effort of changing needles or without the reliance on the owner to change the needles. And I'm sure people back then were just as stingy as people now. When I repair a Victrola for people and tell them they need to use a new needle, they, oh, really? Yeah. And I gotta believe people were just as stingy back then and reused needles over and over. And you know, that wouldn't happen with an Edison player, cylinder or disc, actually.
It had to be strong though to bring a box of Edison records to a friend's house for a party.
Yeah, for real. There's no affordability there. No.
Yeah, 1 pound a piece.
Yeah. Anything else?
Dave, you mentioned you had a little display there that you went over quickly when Hollywood came to Port Huron, and I think you told us a bit about that when we did the run through. It sounded like it was. Is there anything more you can quickly add to that?
Just that it was probably
Hollywood
the
made
biggest
it a big
thing
deal.
ever to happen in Port Huron. You know, a big movie star like that coming, and I often think who from Hollywood would generate that kind of interest today, and I don't think anybody would. Times are different. You know, movie stars, you only saw them at the movies. They were bigger than life all the time at the movies. It's not like you watch them on late night TV and, you know, they're running their mouth about whatever, you know, just, and I don't mean that in a negative way. You never got to know them at any level except their movie persona. And Mickey Rooney in 1940 was the biggest star in Hollywood. He was king of the box office, they called him, or king of the movies. So when he came to town, it was a really big deal. Nobody talked about the fact that Thomas Edison's wife was here, or Louis B. Mayer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios. It was all Mickey Rooney. And the people that were around still talk about it. On one of my, the times we showed the movie Young Tom Edison, I gave my little talk about all the mistakes or just made up stuff about it. And afterwards, this old guy came up to me and he said, I got to tell you my Mickey Rooney story. My dad had the insurance agency across the street from the Harrington Hotel. He said, my brother and I were in the window like this for hours watching for Mickey Rooney. We knew he was going to stay across the street at the hotel. Finally, this big limousine pulled up. It was pouring rain. Mickey Rooney got out. He pulled his hat up over, or coat up over his head, and he ran into the building. And we were so excited, so thrilled to see the back of Mickey Rooney running into the hotel. And we've got the picture of him coming into the hotel. And I often think of that old guy and his brother across the street watching him run in. And it was just that kind of experience. They saw Mickey Rooney. Now, Mickey Rooney was back here in 2004, I think. I wasn't working here then. I volunteered since the museum opened. I've done things here. But he came back to Port Huron for a thing the museum called Dinner and a Movie with Mickey Rooney. Huh. And he spent the day here. He was absolutely horrible to everybody. The woman who had my job at the time had to spend the whole day with him, and he was just rude and nasty. They got to the hotel, the Thomas Edison Inn, which is right next to the museum here, and it was all set up for the banquet. You know, they're going to watch the movie and have dinner, and there were wine bottles on the table. And he said, oh, we'll have none of that. And she had already cracked into the one wine bottle and probably had most of it gone. And she said, would you just sit your little butt down and shut up and give us 5 minutes without all your crap and your whining and your complaining? And he stormed off. He wasn't going to give his speech till his stepson, Chris, took him aside and said, your contract says you'll give this speech. If you don't want the $10,000, that's up to you. So he begrudgingly gave that speech. And my wife and I were at this event, and we're standing side by side, and he and his entourage literally shoved us aside to get out of there. Not excuse me, not, well, I gotta watch what I say, but he was just rude. And Don Gaffel in Milan, Ohio, he's got the same kind of stories. They brought Mickey Rooney to Don's shop, Sights and Sounds of Edison. And Chris, his stepson, said, you're going to have to stay here with Don, Dad, while Mom gets her hair done for this thing tonight. And Mickey Rooney steps in. He goes, I'm not staying in this dump. Well, that's fine. You can wait in the car, but we're not going to leave it running. It's February 10th in Ohio. Pretty cold. It's fine, but I'm not signing any god dang autographs. well, Dad, your contract says you'll sign a certain number of autographs for the people involved with bringing you here. Don is one of these people. Fine. So he begrudgingly signed some old magazine ads that Don had. But he was just horrible, absolutely horrible. So that was the second time Mickey Rooney was in Port Huron, and wasn't as nice. People tried to give him flowers and little gifts and things, and what do I want with that? It was just horrible. So. Anyway, probably said too much.
I
You can
remember
see why
reading
he was married
recently.
so many times.
Yeah, he was married 8 times apparently.
Yeah.
Probably
What
said
is
Yeah,
something.
not surprising, eh?
And I believe he ended up dying pretty poor, considering all the money he made.
Yes.
Just blew it all.
Well, he
Oh.
claims his family stole it.
Yeah. Okay.
He actually testified in front of Congress about elder abuse and
All
that
right.
kind of stuff,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway, it's enough of Mickey Rooney. Does anyone have any other questions or comments about Thomas Edison or anything that Dave has shown us? No? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I just wanted to
Richard, go
quickly
ahead.
yeah, I just want to say one thing. As of now, my video seems to be working okay. Let's hope it continues this way when we have the little auction.
Awesome.
Got a bunch of items for sale, a lot of items, or a few, or what's
We have 16.
Yes, we do.
16
okay?
items.
What
Yeah.
happens?
Okay, so
Yeah.
let me wrap up this section of it. Dave, I wanted to thank you and Sarah too for the fabulous tour you've given us. I see a lot of the comments that are pouring in on the chat box. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed it. I know I
Well, thank
certainly
you.
did. Would you want to tell us again about the hours, the dates that the
Sure.
museum's open?
Beginning in April, we're open on weekends, May in weekends, and then about the second week of June, we go 7 days a week, 10 to 5 until Labor Day, and then we're back to weekends only until about the end of October.
Okay. If our members want to see you specifically at the museum, should they call ahead or email you or something like
Yeah,
that?
I'm usually off Sundays and Mondays.
Okay.
So if you want to meet with me, it's best to come on a different day than that. I mean, if you're going to be in the area and you can't change your day, depending on what I have going on, I might be able to sneak in for a little bit. And visit or
That's nice.
something.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as a small thanks, we normally give a package of the bamboo needles to anybody who does a presentation. And so again, these are the Burmese colored needles that are made in England, and it's courtesy of Steve O'Neill and Andy Briggs. And we
Thank you.
want to give you a package and hope you enjoy them. But I know you're not doing this presentation for these needles, but we just want to say thanks. And again, can't thank you enough for a wonderful tour. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
even better in person if you can come.
Oh, right. Yeah, I guess it'd be a lot easier to read a lot of the small little displays and things.
Oh yeah,
Watch the
there's
video.
so much. There's so much you couldn't really see on a Zoom meeting.
How long should someone allow to give a good tour?
If you're a real Edison fan, a couple of hours.
Okay.
If you're going to check everything out and chat with me about Edison. I had a guy in here from the Edison National Historic Site in New Jersey. He spent about 3 hours here, and we chatted a long time about Edison and his boyhood here.
That's great. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. I'm going to
Thanks,
log
Dave.
off,
Okay.
go to my daughter's house and do some trim work.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks
Bye, Dave.
again, Dave.